Hey, summer is here, and Gettysburg's licensed battlefield guides are ready to kick off another full season of specialized battlefield walks on their favorite subjects. First, enjoy an educational stroll at sunset with Tuesday evening walks through history starting on June 6th and going until the end of August. Then tours switch to Sunday afternoons and go to the end of October. The walks cost $35 each, and registration is required in advance. And don't forget, from September 22nd until the 24th, the Association of Licensed Battlefield Guides is proud to present Oak Ridge Attack and Defense. 3 days, 10 licensed battlefield guides, 7 battlefield tours, and much more. For the full schedule and registration, and don't forget you have to register for these, visit GettysburgTourGuides.org, GettysburgTourGuides.org.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg, the 160th anniversary of July 3rd, 1863, the third and final day of the battle. Sitting with us today, we're at the Point of Woods, if you know where that is. Ralph, unfortunately, was driving to Fire Island, New York, because apparently there's a Point of Woods there, and he put it in his GPS, and halfway there he realized it was the wrong Point of Woods. But we're at the Point of Woods on the battlefield out in front of the Virginia Memorial, sitting comfortably in the shade here. It's a gorgeous day. Joining me today is a fan favorite, Charlie Fennell. Hello, Charlie.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thanks for asking.
And, of course, as I mentioned, Ralph Siegel is with us as well, another fan favorite.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Nice to be here. Beautiful day.
Always glad to have you. And a soon-to-be fan favorite, because her episodes haven't come out yet, but from the licensed town guides is Rosanne Zajko. Hello, Rosanne.
Hello. Happy to be back.
So you are, all 3 of our anniversary shows, you've been the town guide representative. And there was something that we wanted to correct from a previous one, right?
Yes.
What was that? And what was that, July 2nd or July 1st?
We were talking yesterday. You had asked about a civilian injury, about a woman who was shot in the hip. And I was unfamiliar with it, and so was Lois. Very serendipitous discovery, though.
Yes.
As you guys are doing your get out of the car tour, I'm driving east on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, somewhere around milepost 300 or so. I had Addressing Gettysburg podcasts queued up.
Very smart.
Don't go anywhere without them.
Thank you.
And what pops up but Tim Smith's Sweeney Tavern Story Time.
Okay.
Episode on civilians. And somewhere halfway through, he starts talking about a woman that was shot in the hip. I said, I have to tell Matt about this. And the details, as Tim relayed them, was that the woman was Georgiana Stauffer. She's 24 years old. She lived on Baltimore Street. She had 2 young children. And an eyewitness, but the thing is the eyewitness is not described. So someone, though, saw her as she's passing out water on the street, saw her sink to the ground after being shot in the hip during the second day of the battle. Now, interestingly, her husband is with Company K, Jacob Stauffer.
Okay.
And as you know, Company K was able to come home on July 3rd, and Jacob pays a visit to his wife, and they're welcoming a little bundle of joy 9 months later.
Yes. I find so hard to believe. I mean, it must be true, but how do you do that after being shot through the hip?
Well, we don't know how severe her injury was. But that is a very good question. Very good question. Too bad we can't go back and ask.
I mean, I in my head, when I hear shot through the hip, I'm thinking it enters one side and goes all the way through out the other. Well, how are you conceiving a child? I don't know.
The excuses.
What's that?
Not tonight, honey. I've been shot through the hip.
Yeah, I've got a hip ache. Instead of the old headache.
I've been out in the field for 2 years. I don't care if you've been shot through the head.
Yeah, we're making this baby. Well, anyway, so we have an answer there finally now. Yeah.
And we also have an answer to the postmasters.
Go ahead.
We were also talking about why did David Bueller, the postmaster, run off?
Yes.
Why would the Confederates be interested in arresting postmasters of all people? Apparently, during Stuart's Chambersburg raid, and I'm sure that you guys probably know more about this than I do, Lee gave instructions to Stuart, and he says, should you meet with citizens of Pennsylvania holding state or government offices, bring them with you, that they may be used as hostages or as a means of exchange. So 9 of them on that Chambersburg raid were arrested. So that's why David made tracks out of town.
He was pretty smart to do so. So because he was a government official.
He was a government official.
He was a target. Okay. So, well, then it's good that there was that raid in 62 then. So that he knew what the hell to do and get out of town. All right, good. And then also there was, I think, a question with one of the episodes with you. I believe it was the July 1st episode about cannons being fired in town. I don't know if we addressed that on the July 2nd.
Did.
Oh, we did? Okay.
We did, but one of the things that Lewis also asked yesterday is any of the civilians talk about the cannonade or the artillery. And we did talk about it a little bit more today because of the cannonade.
Yeah.
There are a lot more reminiscences in memoirs about what they remember from that.
Because a lot of that was closer to town than on July 2nd. All right, so then let's start with July 3rd then here. We'll start with you, Chaz. Okay. So July 3rd, morning dawns, or maybe it doesn't even dawn yet. Lee wakes up in the morning. What's in his head? What's he planning on doing?
Well, what's in his head is to continue the battle that he thinks he's winning. What he had anticipated doing, I guess if you read his report, is to continue the attack on July 2nd, okay, which means that you're supposed to hit the ends of the Union line as simultaneously as possible, and that means probably at dawn there. Ewell's men who had got a lodgment on Culp's Hill were to continue the action. I think that lodgment on Culp's Hill gave Lee the belief that just a little bit more of a push would do the trick, would bring him victory.
Right.
Of course, Longstreet is diametrically opposed to it because it's not his plan, so it's not a good one. And he has other opinions. He talks about making a frontal assault on the Union position, not a good idea, which is never a good idea to make a frontal assault. But for whatever reason, he was still trying to go around. For those movie watchers, the Gettysburg movie, if you've watched it 11 times, congratulations. You know that he wants to go around to the right. And so he sent scouts out that morning to reconnoiter roads that he might use to be able to get around the Union position there, essentially behind the round tops. There. Of course, as we know, the key ground, and I want to make this point, is Cemetery Hill.
Right.
It's not Little Round Top, it's Cemetery Hill. And the attack on July 2nd, as we know from our extensive reading of the primary documents, was to be up the Emmitsburg Road. But then you have Sickles screwing everybody up. He's in the way. But the point is that the attack didn't go up the Emmitsburg Road on July 2nd. So if you understand that, then you understand where Lee's coming from on the 3rd. The attack, and he wanted Longstreet's entire corps to make the assault, would be essentially kind of up the Emmitsburg Road while Ewell's hitting the other side of the line. So that's how Lee could come across and say the plan remains unchanged. Longstreet, of course, pointed out quite correctly that 2 of his divisions are pretty much shot to pieces, and that would be McLaws and Hood, and they're on the right of the Confederate line. If they leave, that would expose the Confederates to maybe being turned in that direction, like from essentially Peach Orchard or from Little Round Top area, let's put it that way. So Lee acquiesces in that, and so then he goes to Hill and picks out a couple of units from Hill. Pettigrew Division had July 2nd off. It's great. They had the bloodiest day of the battle off, but they got shot to pieces on the first day, you see. And then Trimble wants a command, and Lee wants to get rid of him, I think, and so he sticks him on Pender, who's been wounded, and he takes 2 brigades from Pender. And so this is the plan, at least before the first shots fired, is that Lee wants to simultaneously or near simultaneously strike both ends of the Union line. Okay. Well, why doesn't he do it that way? What thwarts his plans? Well, I think a couple of things. I would suggest to you that Longstreet wasn't ready. When Lee rides down to check things out, Pickett's men haven't been deployed yet. They're still back on the Pitzer farm. And he hears gunfire from Culp's Hill. So a lot of people argue that the Union attack on Culp's Hill kind of preempted the attack, the Confederate planned attack. If it did anything, it prevented Lee from calling the attack on Culp's Hill off.
Okay.
Because it's a going thing.
Yeah.
And so Ewell's on his own hook. Starts around 4:30 in the morning with artillery fire. And basically the idea was for the Confederates to push the Union off the hill and for the Union to push the Confederates off the hill.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have these two similar plans that are, as we say, juxtaposed, whatever that means. That's just a big word, and I don't know what it means. It means together, some sort of simultaneous there.
So it's for the people that are new to this and maybe haven't gone any deeper than watching the movie. This is an important thing because the movie doesn't even really talk about Culp's Hill at all.
I think it's mentioned in one sentence.
I think so. And I think there might be a reference on the morning of July 3rd in the movie to cannon fire in the distance. And I think it's Chamberlain. He says could be a diversion.
Right.
I don't know if that's what they're referring to specifically, but it's morning.
I think you're right. I mean, the rest of the Union Army can certainly hear the cannon fire.
Yeah.
It's all Union.
Right.
The problem the Confederates have, they don't have good artillery positions to support their attack on Culp's Hill, if for no other reason, because as the Confederates advance on the Union position, they're in the woods.
Right.
So if you're going to shoot the Yankees, you're invariably going to hit Confederates. So it's a Union artillery that starts the ball around 4:30
First
in the
light.
morning. Yeah.
Right. So now they're on was that Powers Hill?
Yes.
And they're firing into the Confederates that they can see over, not right on Culp's Hill, but kind of down in that meadow there. Is that correct?
Yeah, or on, and I'm still going to call it that, lesser Culp's Hill.
Lower Culp's Hill, yeah.
Lower Culp's Hill, essentially where the Maryland Confederate Monument is. The Confederates are back in the woods there. They're firing up Rock Creek there, which gives them an open field of fire into the Confederate positions. They know they're there. They're in the woods. They're massed in the woods. Daniels asks permission to move his brigade forward into a kind of a nook, an irregularity in the terrain so that he can get away from that artillery fire coming from Powers Hill, but also coming from the Baltimore Pike.
Right. You're right.
Yeah,
you can't forget there's those batteries along the Baltimore Pike too.
It's a big force.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to see, maybe Charlie knows, for most of the time I've been coming to Gettysburg, those two United States battery markers on Hunt Avenue were just there all by themselves. And people drove past them.
Never paid them any mind.
They never had guns.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know.
That's
now
true.
There are two nice Napoleons sitting there marking off the battery position of Kinsey and Rugg. I don't know when those two Napoleons went in, but for most of my time here, there were no guns there because I've done tours back there talking about what Charlie's talking about. So think about that. There's 12 Napoleon cannon lined up on the Baltimore Pike, firing into the saddle and the lower hill of Culp's Hill.
Yeah.
They're close. I mean, that is a heavy bombardment, and heavier weight artillery brains than mine have taken me out that we've looked at that, and the late Hans Hensel was one of them who suspected that this may be the first instance of indirect artillery fire on a mass scale in the Civil War, because those two batteries could not see what they were shooting at, and scouts were coming back, or the first artillery observers were coming back saying, "You're shooting a little low, you're shooting a little high, you're like hitting you're hitting my men."
Right.
And they were adjusting fire with 12 Napoleon cannon firing into those woods. Where a solid cannonball going into trees that's a scary thing.
Yeah.
There's branches, tree trunks, and ticks going to come pouring down.
Yeah. The most frightening.
Ever-present ticks.
So even though these guys are not in view and they're crouched down, that's unnerving.
Yeah, sure.
These solid shot cannonballs, 12 of them at a time, bashing into these trees. That'll ruin your breakfast.
And they were also helping direct the fire from Powers Hill because they can't see into the woods either. I think if you look at the accounts of McDougall's brigade, you'll find that just about every officer, commanding officer of every regiment, indicates friendly fire.
Right.
And Wooster of the 20th made arrangements, as we know, to send men back, and he was
right. Originally, he threatened to shoot them.
He was going to turn his regiment around.
Right.
I think the most animated one though was Selfridge, and I always get that wrong. Is at 46 Pennsylvania, it's just down the hill, and he went back with sword in hand, pistol cocked in his hand.
Oh, was that
and
him?
Demanded to know who was in charge.
Yeah.
And there's poor little Lieutenant Muhlenberg. I'm in charge. And he said, you either correct the range or I'll shoot you dead on the spot. He said, it will be done, sir. And in his report, I think Muhlenberg indicates that this forward observing actually enhanced the effectiveness of the artillery barrage. Well, I think you're right, Ralph, that this was one of the first, if not the first, instance of using forward observers to direct indirect fire into a mass formation.
Right.
Typically we've talked about this before, but the standard, which is hard for people to remember because we use the word artillery, is that the Civil War artillery, I call them when I do programs, I call it comparable to modern day armor.
Okay.
Tanks, yeah. Because they got to see what they're shooting at.
Yeah.
Whereas modern day artillery is miles behind the front line, arcing fire from miles away. And the frontline infantry troops, they don't see them.
Right.
Where Civil War artillery, the troops are crashing into them. They're all around them.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the artillery fire at dawn on Culp's Hill unique, is that here they're shooting at something they can't actually see. I mean, they can see the hill, they can see the woods. Put fire in there. Okay. And here comes a guy with a sword and a gun saying, all right, maybe did I get that wrong?
Yes, interesting.
And they're doing so is because the night before, when fighting was occurring on Culp's Hill, the Confederates were able to take the breastworks on Lower Culp's Hill, or as you say, Lesser Culp's Hill, or as Tim Smith says, Spangler's
Hill. Yes.
We'll be looking
that's
for
what we
that
need,
hill
another
forever.
Spangler.
Too many Spanglers.
Yeah, but no. So that's what they're trying to do. They're opening up on them because they want to dislodge them.
Yes.
And they want to get those.
The plan was, as I've refined it in my own thinking, trying to make sense out of chaos, which is a stupid idea, but the idea was to drive them out at dawn, from the Union perspective.
Right.
Okay, Slocum said as much after the Corps commanders' meeting over at Meade's headquarters that evening before on July 2nd. So what I think they had planned was that Geary was to attack after the artillery barrage and drive down into the mass of Confederates in front of what was essentially Greene's line on Culp's Hill. In the meantime, Williams was to make a series of probes to draw attention away from Geary's attack. So kind of diversions, the 27th Indiana, 2nd Massachusetts, part of that 20th Connecticut moving forward, all part of that. The 1st Maryland Potomac Home Brigade. These were all these little probes that were designed to distract attention from the main assault. Unfortunately for Geary, the Confederates are sitting there and saying, hey, as soon as we get the chance, we got to hit them. Because we're down here in this low ground, we can hear them talking right above us. And so as soon as they got the chance, they attacked Geary first.
Okay.
And so this is kind of how that battle then began to evolve into the slugfest that we know and love today, 7 hours of close combat.
Yeah, so that's 7 hours, and we often point this out on the show, so I'm sorry for those of you who've heard it, but 7 hours plus 4 or 5 the night before, right?
Correct.
So 12 hours of fighting over Culp's Hill, and it gets hardly any attention nowadays, but where we're sitting today, what everybody just calls Pickett's Charge, gets that and Little Round Top get all the attention. How long do you think Pickett's Charge took from soup to nuts?
From artillery to end?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 3 hours.
3 hours.
Right.
Maximum.
3 hours.
Maximum.
Max. And Little Round Top, that area there, that fighting, 2 maybe?
Yeah, 3. Yeah,
2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
We'll give them
So
both
6
about
hours
3 hours.
total.
It's hard on July 2nd to calculate exactly when things begin, because the best way to calculate what happens is the sequences, evolutions. This happened, then that happened, then this happened, then that happened. Well, how do you put a clock on that?
Yeah, that's tough to do.
I think most people agree that the heavy assault against Little Round Top didn't really begin till around 4:30 at the earliest.
Right.
And that means you only got, and in the woods,
Right.
you only got 3 hours of real daylight, and the woods cut that down.
Sure.
I think you made a good point, Ralph, that everything in the Civil War is direct line of sight.
Yeah.
It's fire, it's line of sight, it's communication, line of sight. So for those people that often sit and wonder, in their living room, why they stop fighting at night, this is why.
Yeah.
And if that still doesn't get your attention, ask Stonewall Jackson when you see him.
Yes.
He will fill you in.
They also don't see well. They don't see well at night.
No, it's very hard to do
don't.
that. Yeah. They say
They
they
don't.
didn't have flares and floodlights
they
and
didn't.
things.
They also
No
didn't
ambient
have,
light.
They also didn't have a good source of vitamins.
So their eyesight was
our,
bad.
Our night vision, thanks to vitamin E and a bunch of others,
Yeah.
is far superior to their night vision.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah,
all about
they're
diet,
vitamin
you know.
deprived.
Well, yeah. Well, it is, though.
Sure,
I mean,
it
yeah,
is.
diet is very
That's a
important.
good point, Ralph.
You know,
Very good point.
They're
As-
eating bacon and hardtack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not even good bacon, you
No,
know.
it's
And
rancid.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah.
They gotta
These
have
are
something to
not.
wash it down.
This is not a healthy diet we're talking
No, well,
about
they're
here.
not getting vitamins.
No fruits and
They
vegetables.
really are.
Very
They're
little.
not getting a lot of vegetables either.
Yeah.
They do try to eat fruits when they can. They're picking the cherries off the trees in Pennsylvania. They're getting sick.
Yeah, right.
Because they're too early.
They're too early. Same with the apples.
Too early.
Get the General's Quick March.
Yeah, well, there's that. What was it? Antietam, I think. Right? They were picking the corn and eating it,
They were eating
and,
the corn,
and it
yeah,
was
green.
too green.
Yeah.
and they'd get diarrhea from it.
Yep.
Well, also that's the other thing too is when you're starving, vegetables and fruit I hear are not the thing to be eating because
Probably not,
it's too much. I forget what it is, but it basically makes you have diarrhea. Roseanne, you know
Nellie
this?
Ollenbaugh was talking about seeing Confederates in her father's store or her uncle's store, and they come across mackerel and salted.
Holy
and they were
mackerel.
so hungry, they picked them up and they were eating them
Ugh.
right out of the barrel. And it made her mother very upset to see, even though there are Confederates, she did feel some sense of responsibility that she didn't want to see them eating them raw like that, so she offered to cook them, except that then the kids had to keep an eye out for Dad, because if he came home and found that she was cooking the fish for the Confederates, he would have been very upset.
Sure.
But yeah, they were eating these fish raw, salted mackerel.
Yeah, well, when you're hungry, you're hungry. You know.
Everything looks good.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
So the fighting goes on, ends around noonish, right?
Roughly around noon,
over at Culp's Hill. Meanwhile, Lee's thinking what? Well, first of all, how about we didn't touch on the Union High Command yet.
Right.
So go back to Dawnish. What's
Dawnish?
going on with Meade and all of his buddies?
Well, Meade is supposedly one of the classic lines as when they were leaving the Corps Commanders Conference. He called Gibbon over, John Gibbon, who's commanding Second Corps now due to the wounding of Hancock. And he said, John, Lee has tried the ends of our lines today. I believe if he attacks tomorrow, it'll be in the center. Are you ready? And, of course, you never tell your boss you're not ready. And John Gibbon said, sure, I'm ready for him. And so, in a sense, perhaps Meade anticipated that the attack would be on the center the next day. What do you
But
think?
also interesting and sort of danced around delicately in his memoir, John Gibbon's memoir, is the attack will come on my front. Our meeting just broke up. Why didn't you mention that during the meeting? Why didn't you point that out?
Yeah, he did after
Why
the
do you
meeting.
wait till
He
after?
waited till after.
Wait, John, I mean, that seemed like an important piece of thanks.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that court.
Yeah, why would you wait
Yeah,
and just
you-
pull one guy aside?
Don't you
because-
think the rest of the Army wants to know this?
Yeah.
Well, and I think because Meade was kind of guessing,
Yeah,
and I mean that's just completely my read of it.
sure. It makes sense.
John Gibbon doesn't go here in his memoir. He just says he was a little surprised that Meade came up and told him that, and so he could be surprised for any number of reasons.
Yeah.
But my read on it is, why didn't you mention that in front of all the other guys? They were all just here.
Would have helped. Yeah, really.
Yeah, we get some
And
discussion.
I think it's because Meade was like, I don't know where I have no intel telling me where I'm coming from.
Right.
They didn't get any valuable prisoners late on July 2nd that gave them any insight into what was in front of them.
Right.
They pretty much knew what was in front of them from cavalry, but so he's just taking a wild shot at it. I think he's looking at, if I was doing this, that's what I would do, and so that's what I think Lee's going to do.
Yeah, probably.
Right.
And then maybe he just guessed right. I mean, he did guess right.
It's now we look at it, it's logical.
Yeah. But he nothing happens.
He may also. There's no evidence to think that Meade thinks. I'm tangling myself up in a pretzel. Sixth Corps has arrived.
Yes.
Lots of guys have showed up.
Sure.
Longstreet pulls his attack back. Meade probably thinks that Lee knows Sixth Corps has arrived. We know now he doesn't.
Right.
So Meade is thinking, he knows I've reinforced on my left. He's going to come at my center.
Okay.
Even though Lee
don't.
doesn't know he's reinforced on the left. It's never been clear because, these guys don't write anything.
Right. Because they don't think these things are
Longstreet
important.
sees people coming in.
Yeah.
And he calls off Wofford's attack because the Yankees are coming up out of the ground. Wofford had the deepest penetration of the brigades in McLaws' division that attacked on July 2nd. Yep. See, I told you I'd get you till July 2nd as Pickett's charge. Yeah, and William Wofford's Georgia Brigade with half of Joseph Kershaw's South Carolina Brigade was attacking the front side, the west side of Little Round Top. He stopped them.
Yeah.
Longstreet stops them. I believe Longstreet sees troops coming from the left. And I believe this because a friend of mine's grandfather was in Cobb's Legion, and he has documents from Sergeant William West that I'll be using in my upcoming book.
Oh.
They're in the library. He donated them when John Heiser was still a librarian. Stuff is in there, Cobb's Legion, the reports of Sergeant Major William West, that he saw troops coming from his left on the left side of Munchower Hill.
Okay.
And then Longstreet, who's on horseback, came over. Now, West doesn't tell him. I pointed to General Longstreet, say, you see what I'm seeing? But he's seeing it. Sergeant Major's position is on the left flank of an advancing regiment. Longstreet's riding all over. And I believe it's New Jersey Brigade.
Oh, okay.
That is coming over from the other point of woods.
Yes.
There's another one from Fire Island.
Yeah. The Cemetery Ridge point of woods where the New Jersey Brigade monument is.
Right.
True.
Torbert's brigade arrives, looks around. Well, it's all quiet here, but it's noisy over there, and he sends a regiment and a half southward toward Little Round Top. They're marching behind Munchower Hill, but I think they can all see them. And that's why Longstreet pulls off.
I see.
You guys are doing well in the front, but we're going to get swallowed. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
And he doesn't pull back all that far. He pulls back uphill into the wheat field, and then Crawford chases him with the flag and all of that. So Meade is probably thinking he must know that Sedgwick has arrived, but he doesn't. But he is thinking that we've hit him in the flanks hard yesterday. He will concentrate all his force on the flanks. I'll do this when I'm on tours, and I'll tell people. And that he's only left a force of about 5,000 on what we today call Cemetery Ridge.
Right. That's right.
Because, most of the Army is on those two flanks.
Right.
But 5,000 will be enough.
That's enough, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, Meade knows that, thanks to the BMI, that the only division that has not been seen by his men is Pickett's, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd give that to the BMI.
Okay, who would you give that to?
I think I'd give that to Buford's Cavalry and Merritt.
Oh. Okay.
Outriders, they don't write reports about it, but these outriders, and Buford was very reputable for that, the old Indian fighter.
Yeah.
Is you send scout outriders out, and then they're not reporting that in writing.
Right,
But he's got outriders out. I think he knows exactly where Pickett is. Sam Elliott does, because Sam Elliott tells Brian Mallon that Pickett's division's in Chambersburg.
That's right.
Pickett's back in Chambersburg. Whether John Buford really knew where he was, but he knows he's not here.
Right.
Yeah.
Charlie, earlier you had said something, and I know someone out there is listening, and they're like, that's not true. I want to give you a chance. You said that Gibbon was in charge of the 2nd Corps and the morning of July 3rd because Hancock was wounded. But Hancock's not wounded till the afternoon.
3rd, Hancock was given the center.
Right. So Hancock is wing command.
Yeah,
and he's in command.
That's
okay.
True, yeah.
So I just wanted to give you that, because it's not that Charlie doesn't know. He just misspoke, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, he's in charge of the 2nd and 3rd Corps.
Okay. All right. So now, the plan that would later become Pickett's charge comes about how?
Well, I think you could say Lee has to have lived a little bit. Ewell's heavily involved in fighting on Culp's Hill. So what are we going to do here? Longstreet's not ready to immediately assist him. And so he starts to think about maybe, strike across this field, because the battle is, like Ralph pointed out, the Union Army's on the flanks.
Yeah.
They're on the flanks. I remember a talk years ago, it was last century, so my memory might not be as clear as it should be. But I remember a talk, and when they used to have the little talks at the junior high before the ghosts sucked everybody out. And Scott Hartwig was doing the talk, and he said that Lee had to come up with another plan of action, and so he and Longstreet walked out into the field here somewhere in front of their skirmishers, and they stood 20 feet apart so as not to attract attention. I always wondered about that. But anyway,
did they take their staffs with their flags
their
out?
Staffs were left behind.
Oh, okay, good. That's smart.
They were left behind, but they were in the vicinity.
Yeah.
And what Lee was pointing out was an angle in a stone wall across the field there, and Lee was saying this is where they will break. Okay, and Longstreet then, supposedly the great line, he says there's not 20,000 men in history that can make that charge.
Right.
And Lee says, well, it must be done. Because Lee realizes, even though the general population doesn't today, that he didn't come here to win a battle. He came here to win the war.
Yeah.
He's looking for a battle of annihilation.
Right.
And he's got them on the ropes.
Yeah.
And so attacking across that field, as you know, after the first day, the Union only really controlled 2 of the 10 roads come to town. They're both behind Cemetery Ridge. And if he can get across those roads, it's over.
Right.
Okay. And so that's where the plan starts to materialize, and they go through the discussion about Lee wants Longstreet's corps, can't do it. Okay, we'll use you, and I'll go get some guys from Hill, put under your command. I do not think, and I may be wrong on this, that Longstreet tried to give the attack to Hill, like he did in the movie. Well, it's mostly Hill's men. Why don't you let him command it?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think Longstreet was at least egotistical enough to
take command
of it there. So that's what Lee's planning, and they waited until the attack on Culp's Hill had wound down. So it's just a couple hours, and Lee has to organize the artillery. Lee's smart enough to realize that you need to somehow neutralize Union artillery if any troops going across that field are going to have any chance for success. And that's going to take time to bring the artillery from essentially 3 corps of his army into position. And so it's probably not going to happen much before noon. And as it happened, it was 1 o'clock on the afternoon of July 3rd. So
you mentioned Meade having 2 of the 10 roads.
Yes.
What roads were they, and why are they important to Meade?
Okay, they were the Taneytown Road, which, as we know, goes to Taneytown. Isn't it great?
Yeah.
In those days, you took a road, and if you wanted to go to Emmitsburg, took the Emmitsburg route. You didn't take 15 south. Where in the heck's that go?
Right.
Okay.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Just go south.
And the other was Baltimore Pike, which doesn't go to Baltimore.
Right. No,
so don't take that one.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the main line to D.C. And that's also the main line of command and control for the Union Army.
Yeah.
And, of course, as Meade told his son, allegedly on receiving orders to take command of the Army, he supposedly looked at his son and he says, I got Lee right where I want him. And his son probably said to him, yeah, there's 6 other guys said that too. They're waiting for orders in Trenton, New Jersey.
Right.
I have to cough when I laugh.
Yeah.
But anyway, he said, yeah, he's up in Pennsylvania. And he said the burden of attack will be on him. He said, I can stay up there as long as I want.
Right.
As long as my supply line's secure.
Yep.
So probably of the 2 roads he controls, the most important would be the Baltimore Pike. Now, we do know that Meade came in the Taneytown Road when he arrived, coming from his headquarters in Taneytown.
In Taneytown, which makes sense.
But the Baltimore Pike has that ability to cut you off from D.C. and cut you off from your main supply line, which is Westminster.
Down in Westminster, yeah.
25 miles away. So.
Yeah, the Baltimore Pike
Taneytown
is a little misnomer in that it's a straight shot line right to Westminster.
Right.
And then the old road follows present-day Route 140, sort of heads toward Baltimore, which is how it got its name.
Right, because you could get to Baltimore by taking that road.
It was a turnpike.
Yeah.
To get you to here from here.
Yeah.
Right, but it is not. It's actually right. It's actually a straight line to Washington.
Yeah, it is.
If you go straight through Westminster.
Yeah, if you don't miss the turn, you're in the district.
In Taneytown,
yes.
Do they call the road the Gettysburg Road or the Us Road?
No, the Gettysburg.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you
quit
cough.
making me laugh.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Charlie's recovering
that's
from
the same thing. If you're in Gettysburg and you're going to Harrisburg, it's the Harrisburg Road.
Right.
You're in Harrisburg, come back, it's the Gettysburg.
It's the Gettysburg Road. Yeah.
Or the Heilersburg Road. It's
Same
the next
road.
major town.
It should be called the Harrisburg Lane, and then the Gettysburg Lane, because the road itself has 2 directions. So
It does.
But whatever. It's neither here nor there.
That's right.
All right. So the plan is we're going to attack the center. We're going to have this big bombardment, all concentrating on the center to weaken it, to dislodge the guns, right? To weaken the defenses, soften it up.
Correct.
And then we're going to send 15,000 men, which is really probably closer to 12,000. Right?
I use 13. It's
13.
unlucky.
That's a nice. That's perfect.
We will never know.
We'll never know.
Never know.
We'll never know. But it couldn't be 15,000 men by this point. Could be.
I think Longstreet said that 15,000.
He did.
3 divisions.
But maybe is he going off of on paper? What
He doesn't know what happened on July 1st. He wasn't here.
Exactly.
That's
That's
right,
what
he
I'm
does
saying. Regardless, the point is now. Wait, you just mentioned something there, Ralph, which is important. So Pickett's the only fresh division that's in this fight.
Yeah.
The other 2 divisions, which don't get as much attention under Pettigrew and Trimble, are from the 3rd Corps, A.P. Hill's Corps. They were involved on July 1st. What condition are they in?
Oh, good question, because Lee has a famous quote. I don't actually. I might have it in my notes, which will take me 20 minutes. Lee has after having formulated his orders, he rides through camp and makes some comment along the lines of there are many friends and familiar faces that I don't see here this morning.
Right.
Implying, well, these guys really not got it in the teeth.
Yeah. Doesn't he also say something like many of these men shouldn't even be here, they should be in the hospital?
Yeah.
And then the person he's riding with says, well, if we did that, we'd have nobody left.
Yeah.
So it goes to...
So they're in bad shape.
It goes to General Eisenhower's criticism of Lee, and I like Eisenhower on all of this, because Eisenhower's a big defender of Robert E. Lee's military prowess.
Yeah, he is.
Yet is not, like himself, above identifying error.
Sure.
And so what did Lee do wrong? He didn't have the staff he needed. He did not have adequate staff. And adequate staff means communications.
Yeah.
And so maybe Lee didn't get a timely casualty report from Pender's division.
Yeah.
From Perrin's brigade. Maybe, and then he goes out there and he sees that, all right, well, I know I got Isaac Trimble taking command, and I've got this guy from North Carolina whose name I still can't remember, who's now in command of a whole division. But all the brigades have new commanders. Yes. All these regimental officers are now commanding brigades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, man, we lost a lot of guys on July 1st.
Yeah, the question is, does Lee really know how badly cut up Pettigrew's or Heath's division was?
Yep.
And there it goes back to staff. I think staff is also important for information.
Right.
You know, the bigger staff you have, the more likely you are to collect more information because you have more eyes. You have more people doing it.
But then there's the question of Thomas's brigade. Why they're not really used at all or much in this battle?
Well, I think they're used on the first day. They're backing up the attack. So
right,
they're
but
kind of in reserve, so they're being used. And then they're skirmishing out here in front of me, you know, up beyond the Bliss Farm and that whole area. So they're involved in that skirmishing.
So doing something. But as far as heavy action goes, they really don't see it.
Be with extra Billy Smith, you want to see heavy action. Well, he has one guy shot or something.
Yeah.
You know, because he's in the middle of the line, and the battle never quite gets to him on the second day. And so a very fine brigade that
just doesn't get the chance
to see heavy action.
Right.
And Thomas is kind of in that gray area in the Confederate Army, no pun intended.
Yeah.
There, but
and then so we don't have any idea why Lee doesn't include Thomas's brigade in this action.
Do you have any idea? I have a thought.
What's that?
That I like to use when I'm out with groups where we're doing leadership. I think we may have talked about it on previous episodes. That I get blank stares when I say, what is the general's number one priority? And they're like, well, his priority is, get food. No. What's General Lee's number one priority moving north into Pennsylvania? What is Napoleon's number one priority moving into Russia? What is Hannibal Barca's number one priority moving south through the Italian peninsula?
To win?
Don't lose the army.
Oh.
Pretty much.
Yeah, we're going to go north, and General, President Davis, we're going to go north, we're going to do this, we're going to say, okay, that's great. It's, rah-rah, but whatever you do, bring the army back. Whatever happens,
good,
don't come back by yourself.
Yeah.
Don't lose the army. So when people look at Billy Mahone's brigade and Thomas's brigade and Brockenbrow's brigade and his not wanting to use McLaws and Hood on the third day because they had 40% reduction. And they're like, well, why did that was a mistake. Okay, first of all, Robert E. Lee, he made a mistake, simmer down.
Right.
And number two, you don't know what his plan is because he doesn't write it in terms of protecting himself from an unexpected counterattack.
Right.
Okay.
We cleared out, like I had something to do with it. The Park Service clears out the woods that were across the street from the McMillan farm. And what do they find? Entrenchments. Beautiful entrenchments right through those orchards. Why?
Yeah.
For that counterattack.
Right.
Don't lose the army. So, why didn't he throw more men into Pickett's charge?
Well, not more, fresher men.
Well, that's not a, and then it's, where are they physically located?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's take this brigade and move it back and take that brigade and move it over here. Okay, there's 45 minutes.
Yeah, but you're moving all the artillery into position.
Oh, a lot of where we are here, these guns are out.
Out meaning
they're where they are.
Right.
There's a lot of artillery movement. I'm pointing on the radio.
Keep pointing.
This is audio.
We're at the Point of Woods in front of the Lee.
Yeah, the Virginia Memorial.
The Virginia Memorial, and from that point north to the Lutheran Seminary, that's a mixture of 3rd Corps and 2nd Corps Reserve artillery. 3rd Corps artillery and 2nd Corps Reserve.
Right.
Roughly under the command of Lindsey Walker. And they're moving around. They're bringing up limber wagons. General Pendleton's very active around here, getting on people's nerves and making sure logistics is in place. 1st Corps artillery is between us at the Point of Woods and the Peach Orchard.
Uh-huh.
And they went out at night. Now, Alexander has his battalion, Edward Porter Alexander has his battalion up on the Emmitsburg Road and the Peach Orchard at the end of the fighting on July 2nd.
Right.
So the weight of his force is already up.
Right.
Major James Deering, who commands Pickett's artillery battalion, is coming onto the field, and Deering was actually here with Alexander on July 2nd helping out. His battalion was back with Pickett's division, but Deering himself rode forward to just be on hand. And I'm not sure what he did, but I'm sure Alexander was happy to see him. So Deering is already familiar with what Alexander's doing when Pickett's artillery battalion, which he commands, arrives, and he plugs them in next to where Alexander's battalion had already lined up. One of my favorites when we come out on the Point of Woods is this artillery battery that's right in front of us here. Nobody ever knows what this battery is. And part of the reason is because two of the guns are incorrect.
Yeah.
But people walk up and they think this is part of the artillery on the 3rd Corps. This isn't. This is Pichegru-Woolfolk's battery from Alexander's battalion.
Pichegru.
They moved up to the Peach Orchard on the end of July 2nd. And when it got dark, Alexander deployed that one battery out here to the Point of Woods. So his battalion is split.
Okay.
The Washington artillery comes into the space. Jimmy Deering's artillery comes into the space. And Alexander has two battalions in between the two elements. Doesn't matter. I mean, he's riding up and down the whole line.
Right.
And he's doing this in the dark. Because the Union forces McGilvery will say that we can hear the squeaking. We hear wagons move. What are they doing?
Yeah.
Maybe they're leaving.
Hopefully. But they're not leaving.
And when the sun rises, they see these batteries out there.
Yeah.
They still don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Maybe they're just covering a withdrawal. But it certainly had their attention.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is Alexander's line from here to the Peach. He's not in command of the whole thing, despite the movie. This is a whole separate command. And they're the ones who take all the time to get in line. And they're the ones who start shooting at the Bliss farm.
Right.
And it's like, why are you doing that?
You're talking the 2nd and 3rd
No,
Corps.
on the 3rd day, on the morning of the 3rd day.
No, I'm saying the guns you're talking about are ones that belong to the 3rd and the 2nd Corps.
3rd Corps, and then the 2nd Corps reserves are put in line in the area of the McMillan Farm. I mean, I've got a whole list here. I can read them all to you, but all your podcast viewers will tune
fall
out
asleep and drive off the
watch
road.
Baseball or something.
Yeah.
Right, but
this is just an overview anyway.
The true count of artillery cannon between those 2nd Corps reserve batteries and the 3rd Corps batteries is 104 guns. Alexander's true gun count is 87. So you're looking at 191 guns.
Almost 200.
But most of the books will say 140, 150 cannon.
Right.
Because no one has any idea. Because there's no way they're using all of their guns. So there's 191 guns in the batteries that are out here. But how many of those guns are being rolled action front to open fire, and how many are being kept back because they don't have enough ammo for that gun?
Right.
Or
it might be howitzers and don't have the range.
Right, I was going to say, there's those howitzers behind the monument there.
Or who knows what.
Yeah. But wasn't the plan to also move some guns up with the infantry?
Yes, that's correct.
So then maybe they were ready to move up.
In his book, I think he had a couple numbers, but the highest number he said that was online was 179.
There you go.
So that's what he said in his book.
All right.
But he was also to advance guns to support the infantry, which he did on July the 2nd in the Peach Orchard.
Yes.
His guns rolled right up with the infantry, and according to Hess, who writes about a lot about the Western Theater, but he has some stuff here on the Eastern Theater, Hess alleged that's one of the first times that was ever done.
Oh.
To have the guns advance right with the infantry. So
really? Ever in the war or ever in military history?
Yeah,
okay.
in the war. Yeah.
All right.
No, it was Napoleon did that quite a bit.
I was going to say, it sounds familiar to me.
Yeah.
All right. So the bombardment commences. 2 signal guns in the Peach Orchard, right?
Correct.
But it's Eshelman's battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Eshelman's battalion. John Walton is the overall commander because he had his feelings squinched on July 2nd.
Yeah.
When Longstreet tells him to stay back on Hare Ridge. The young man Alexander's going to take command of all the artillery today.
Right. Walton is actually the artillery chief for the First Corps, right?
He's on paper the chief of First Corps Artillery.
Yeah.
All 5 battalions are under his command, including his very famous and very depleted Washington Artillery from New Orleans.
Right.
One of the most famous artillery battalions in American history. Dates to the early 1700s.
Yeah.
They were the artillery that protected New Orleans.
I'm actually somehow related by marriage to William Miller Owen, who wrote In Camp and Battle with the Washington Artillery. You know?
All right.
Yeah. My uncle married a Virginia girl. And
so Washington Artillery arrives in Richmond, Virginia with much fanfare, and, they parade through the streets. This is most of these artillery battalions are kind of being taped together.
Yeah.
They get in a battery from this part of Virginia, a battery from here, a battery from there. Here comes this whole battalion. But they've lost a lot of guns, and Walton himself has lost a lot of confidence, or at least they've lost confidence in him.
Uh-huh.
Longstreet pulls Alexander aside in the morning, brings him up to his headquarters, and says, "You're going to take command of First Corps Artillery today."
And what did Walton do that made them lose confidence? Or did he do nothing? Much?
Never written down. There is reports from others that the battalions are supposed to take turns as who's in the lead on the road because they're raising a lot of dust.
Right.
Walton always had the Washington Artillery in the lead. And the other battalions, which are larger, including Alexander's Reserve, which is the largest battalion in the entire Army. And it's just... And so there could have been unwritten words.
Yeah.
Hey, how come you're doing that? Well, because we're the Washington Artillery. Oh, roll my eyes,
All right.
I imagine there's no evidence that Longstreet, that Alexander will say... Well, Walton's way older than I am. And Longstreet may have answered, yeah, he's way older than I am, too. I don't care. You're taking command.
Right.
The way I like to explain it to people is Longstreet knows what he's up against here. He doesn't like this attack.
Yeah.
July 1, in front of the seminary, he looked over this ground, and in my read of the record, he saw what was going to come out of Lee's head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we got to attack on the right against the Union flank, and my guys are the ones that are going to have to do it. So he's not enamored with this attack, and he's thinking that it's not written down, it's not in his memoir, but in my opinion, he would look at the ground and say, well-handled guns can save a lot of lives today. And poorly handled guns, still in line or not deployed fast enough, could leave a lot of those boys exposed as they're crossing the fields. I want to make sure my guns are well handled. This Alexander's, he's a prodigy, and I'm going to use him.
Okay, got it.
And if Walton's pissed, which he is, he writes letters for like the next 30 years. I was still in command. So on July 3rd, now that Walton's batteries have been brought up, they let him give the signal shots. Okay, fine.
Okay.
You're in command of the artillery, so you give the signal shots. Fire 3 signal shots to launch the whole thing. And just another mark on Walton's resume, one of the 3 guns misfires and doesn't go off.
So
there's only 2 shots, and everybody's looking around saying, okay, that must have been it.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
And they all open up.
So that's funny. I didn't know that about the 3 turning into 2. All right. So they all open up then, and it's this big, loud cacophony of noise. Rosie, back in town, how are people reacting to this?
They've been hearing artillery fire since 4:30 in the morning. That was their wake-up call.
Right.
One of the women actually said, I don't ever want to wake up to those sounds ever again. And she compared it to the crashing of worlds. And
which we all know the sound of.
Yes, and Sarah Broadhead used those exact words as well as they're writing this. I'm sure they
must
didn't.
Have been sitting right next to each other.
They didn't. What are you saying? But she said the same thing. She said it seemed as if the heavens and the earth were crashing together.
Okay.
So it gives us a very good idea of how loud those sounds were. One of the young boys, I think it was Albertus McCurry or Henry Eister, Jacobs, I can't remember which one, was talking about even feeling the concussion from the artillery.
Oh, sure.
The Confederates at this point are very concerned for the residents of the town, and they're advising them to leave. The town is going to be shelled. And some people, by this point, 2 days are enough for me, I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
Some of them decide to stay nonetheless. And, we were joking about Joseph Broadhead on July 1st, where Sarah is talking about, he slept through the night, or July 1st, July 2nd. How could he do that? When Joseph gets the word, we're leaving, he says, I'm not going anywhere. And he says, I am not leaving my house as long as one brick is lying on top of another. So for many times, he kind of gets a bad rap. Oh, he wouldn't go out and fight with John Burns on day one. But this man's defiant in his own way.
Right.
July 2nd, he's not going to let those Confederates have any of his green beans. He goes out into his garden and picks all of them.
Yeah.
They're not going to have A1. And now he's not going to leave on July 3rd as long as one brick is lying upon another in his house. So he is fighting back in his own way.
They were so poetic then in the way I can't imagine he actually spoke it that way. Like there's all this stress of a battle, and it's like, honey, I'm not leaving as long as one brick is lying on top. Can you just say, as long as this house stands, I'm staying here?
Well, I have to tell you that you mentioned that. Among the other podcasts that I was listening to was the one that you broadcast, I think was Troy Harmon.
Yeah.
And he is talking about how people would write back in those days. I think he called it Bell's... drawing a blank on the rest of it. But yeah, that they were trained to be very observant and to use very expressive language. And you're right, today we wouldn't say that.
No.
And that's one of the things that always strikes me when I read these reminiscences, these memoirs, is that they're very eloquent.
Yeah.
And they pick the exact right word that they need to use. But
I doubt they spoke that way.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah, he probably
I went
had
to
other
see
words.
a movie. I went to see a Civil War movie with a military friend years and years ago. And at the end of the movie, his impact was, did the F-bomb, did they not have that word back then? Because it's every other word out of our mouth in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Did they not have the F-bomb? And they did.
They had it, yeah.
The F-bomb
But my understanding
was in their arsenal.
Yeah, but did they...
But nobody writes it.
But no. But my understanding is that the way it was used was different. It changed. Now it's that versatile word that can be used in any way. And that, from what I understand, happened with the World War II generation. Effing this, F that, But in the Civil War days, it simply meant intercourse. That's what I understand. I forget where I read that, but I was always curious about that myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, all right. So back in town. Bombardment's going on.
Well, they're not leaving their cellars. For obvious
good
reasons.
thinking.
But, you have to think about what have they been through these past 2 days. They look out their cellar windows. They see that the intersections are barricaded. They see the Confederate soldiers patrolling. The smells alone. We have dead and decomposing horses, soldiers, puddles of blood, amputated arms and legs outside the windows of the churches and the schools. And, of course, obviously not enough privies. So
and flies.
The flies that are coming in.
Everywhere.
So, I mean, it's an assault on all of the senses.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? And I think it was even Albertus McCurry says, during the cannonade, we could even taste the saltpeter. So,
wow.
That's
hard. That's so hard to fathom that whole experience.
Well, it's a humid day.
Yeah. So it's sticking.
And the gun smoke is going to hang like a fog.
Yeah.
There are multiple descriptions of the sky darkening and the sun turning bright red. So that's going to drift into the town.
Yeah, of course.
And you can taste that.
Yeah. There's a story. I know Bob Steenstra used to like to tell this, and once he started doing the podcast with me, and Tim Smith would to basically debunk every story that he liked to tell on a tour for 30 years.
I hope Tim doesn't debunk anything. I'm saying I'm worried now.
But there's this one story about a deaf man.
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead, tell that.
I believe that was in McCreary's cellar. And I think we had mentioned that also on the first day, but it apparently occurred on the third day.
Yes.
And then again, he's feeling the vibrations of the artillery shells
And he
as they're passing into
signs to
town.
them that one was close.
Yeah. But it's interesting in the Jacob Cellar. They had visitors from out of town coming in for safety there, and they're listening to the bombardment as it's going on. And apparently they're able to recognize, I don't know how, which guns are the Confederate guns, which guns are the Union guns. But apparently the Union had a big gun, a really big gun. And when it was silent, it worried them, because as their artillery shells are passing overhead, they're saying, oh, that's one for us. Oh, that's one for them.
Yeah.
So when they don't hear this big gun, they're getting very concerned. Oh, maybe we're losing. But apparently all it was that it was so big it had to cool off before they could use it again.
Who was that? That was
in the basement of the Jacobs house.
Where was that?
Washington and
Washington and
Middle.
Yeah. And Middle. Okay.
Yep.
So then I guess they would have been kind of like almost equidistant from the two lines.
Well, interestingly enough, you would think that they would be far enough away, maybe at least as far as High Street, as to be safe. I mean, when we think about the civilians, obviously the ones that are in the southern part of town are the ones in the most danger from the sharpshooters. But even Albertus McCreary at the corner of Baltimore and High Street, he's looking through his trap door on his roof to see what's happening way out there on the southern end of town, and sharpshooters are actually aiming at him. A couple of shots hit the chimney of his neighbor, who's also doing the same thing, and he and his brother. Oh, look how our neighbor! Isn't it funny? He's shot. He's just going to, he didn't get hit, but the bullets strike the chimney. So discretion is a better part of valor. He drops down, and they're laughing. They think it's the funniest thing they ever saw. And the next thing you know, they're doing the same thing. They're getting targeted. And even there, that far away, Albertus was very upset. He couldn't feed his pet rabbit because he can't go outside in the backyard because it would be drawing sharpshooters. So he had the Confederates feed his rabbit for him. They would go out there and they would serpentine between the bullets.
That was nice
but
of them.
that even that far away, there's still danger.
Sure, especially from artillery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How about any impacts on homes? That you
we look today and we see, well, there are 8 or 9 homes that we know of that have battle damage.
Right.
But you have to keep in mind that there were many, many more. And of course, many of them have been repaired over the years. But the Foster House in particular has the reputation of being the one that had the most artillery hits.
Which one's that?
That is the corner of Washington and High Street. And the very first day, I think we might have mentioned, she's out there on the porch up on the second floor, and shell comes through. But yet on the third day, now we talk about how the artillery woke up everyone in town at 4:30 in the morning, except for the 2 Union surgeons that are in Catherine's house. And she's down in the cellar at 4:30, but they're up there in the bedroom sleeping. So she figures by 6 o'clock it's getting a little dangerous. I ought to go wake them up. And she probably saved their lives because the next thing is, a couple of minutes later, as soon as they vacated the room, in comes an artillery shell and, demolishes everything in the room.
God.
And then they go down into the breakfast room and they're having breakfast, and shortly after they leave, another shell comes in and I think sends the forks and the tablespoons flying in all directions. So a lot of near misses for people.
Wow,
I don't know if they're exaggerating. Maybe it was an hour later after they left. But, it sounds a lot better to say, 15 minutes after we left,
shortly
this
thereafter,
happened. So, but most of them did not come above basement level, cellar, into the house because of the danger.
And it's important to note, for anybody who heard you mention the houses that have the artillery shells in them today, they didn't land perfectly and embed themselves in a brick like that. They made a hole. Right. And when they repaired them, they repaired them with putting the brick around the shell, not the shell necessarily either.
Yes,
right. A shell that
shell.
They somehow found.
Yeah. Tilly Pierce says that. She says, shells were not always so. How did she put it? They didn't always introduce themselves in the most perfect manner, or something.
Right.
Something to that effect. But the one that hit the Bergstresser house went in through the wall, through the outside, bounced on the wall, and headed out the window. So they go outside. are they going to find that exact shell? No.
But there's plenty to find.
Yes.
Hopefully they diffuse them.
Well, the McLean house is the same thing. If you read one of the daughter's reminiscences, she said, of course they had a shell come through the attic and comes through and, drops down the steps, but it apparently was a round ball. But yet, if you look at it, it looks like a projectile. And apparently the man that bought the house several years after they sold it in the 1860s wanted his own battle trophy. So he goes out and he just finds one and puts it in there.
Yeah.
Not even the one that hit the house, but, will this happen here? Not even the right ammunition.
Right.
Exactly. So that was long before the days of historical preservation ever existed, so you could get away with it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You guys might know. I think not all that long ago, someone in town tried to doctor up their
Mr. G's.
I'm not naming names.
Charlie just did.
No, it wasn't Mr. G's at the time.
It wasn't at the time.
Okay.
But yes, so that
It was that house.
Yeah, they got their wrist
That was
slapped
the
on
old
that
shut
one.
house.
Yeah.
Fred
And what did they
Mark.
do? Try to put a shell in the brick?
Yeah, put it in the back.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't know who fingered them, but I have a good idea. And they made him take it out.
So they put it in there, and then what? The plan was to go, oh, look what we found.
Yeah, well, I guess they just wanted a shell in their wall.
To show people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were going to run a business.
But is it also true that they did that in order to show where the damage was done for when the government would come to, verify their claims of damage? Have you heard that?
I have not, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. But knowing how difficult it was for anyone to get any kind of reparation, I don't think that having a cannonball in your house is going to rate quite as much as the Bliss farm being burned down. So it's all relative, I think.
Right. But it's a cool thing to see now as you're walking around town. There's would you say 9 of them?
8 and 9. Yeah.
8 or 9. Yeah, that's pretty.
Some
cool.
of them are a little harder to find than others, and but they're always fine. To look at.
I don't remember the name of the house. There used to be the location for the Gettysburg Spa before it moved out.
Gettysburg Spa.
And they had an artillery shell embedded in the wall of their house. This was a unique artillery shell because it stopped in midair. And the house was built 5 years after the battle around the shell. And the shell's there sticking in a wall in a building that wasn't built till 5 years later.
I like that story.
That's an amazing
Supposedly,
shell.
the only one that actually stuck in the wall was at the Lulu's ice cream.
Yeah, it would have been Tyson's photographic studio at the time.
Yeah, that's right. When I several years ago, I was doing a tour. I pointed a shell out, and the guy said it's not there anymore. And I looked, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I said, why? He said, you're the guide, you tell me. And they were working on the Lincoln, where Lincoln stayed, the Wills house. And those two buildings are connected.
Right.
And they were worried if that thing was still alive, the vibrations might set it off.
But the vibrations from the Harley Davidsons and the tractor trailers going down that road every
they
day?
didn't care about that.
Okay.
This is a government job.
Yeah.
They don't have people working with Culp.
Right.
Okay, so they went in, took the thing out, looked at it, wasn't loaded, and they put it back in.
Okay.
So every shell now in the buildings have been taken out, put back in. So we have consistency. True story.
Is it still there? That they did put it back, right?
Yeah, they put it back.
But the little flag next to it's
used to
gone.
be, that
right?
was the main thing.
Yeah.
Double deckers always had to put
Was
it
that
out.
the
What?
Cannonball Malt Shop?
Yeah,
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 Cannonball
Cannonball
Malt
Ice,
Shop.
yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
good.
That was a more perfect name, I think.
I think
Yeah, I
so,
do too.
yeah.
I thought I always liked that.
I still refer it to that when I take people around on the
Yeah.
tours.
Yeah.
I say, this is today's name. I said, but it was called
Yeah.
Cannonball Ice
Cannonball
Cream
Malt
Shop
Yep.
for this obvious reason.
You could sit there in the chair and look up, and there's a cannonball.
Yeah, and it just pays homage to why people are even coming here in the first place. All right, so bombardment lasts roughly what? How long?
No. An hour is a safe.
Okay, at least
Yeah.
an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or around an
not
hour.
less than an hour.
Okay,
And not
You-
more than two.
not more than 2.
Somewhere
So
in
hour and a half, hour 45, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 hours.
Yeah,
But that's a long time.
it is.
I mean, everybody must have had a headache, right?
What you say?
Yeah,
and they were deaf.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're
They were
deaf
deaf.
is
Yeah.
what they are.
now-
Ceasefire. What? Ceasefire. What?
Yeah. What do you say?
It's a good thing they had hand signals. So, what are some of the stories that come to mind for you battlefield guides while the bombardment's going on? I'm thinking more of the Union troops just kind of laying there as it's all happening, going over them, under them, into them. Any little anecdotes you got to
Well,
share?
you have the famous Hancock story.
Yeah.
That as the troops are all on the ground and thinking of maybe I should be on the other side of this ridge, maybe I should be on the Taneytown Road, that Hancock on horseback will ride up the line
Right.
and would gesture with his hand for everyone to be calm.
Hence
And
the
that's
statue.
depicted on his statue
Yeah.
on East Cemetery Hill, where
Right.
it makes zero sense, you know. like stay calm out here on East Cemetery Hill. What? But that's the
Yeah.
and then of course the
See, that's funny you say that though, because I always took that to be, when he comes to the field on the night of the 1st, that he's a kind of a calming presence because him arriving indicates more troops are coming. And,
all right, I'll buy that.
Yeah, so that's why I always thought it was on East Cemetery Hill.
I think it was a case of the sculptor not knowing till the last minute that his statue was not going to be on Cemetery Ridge.
Okay.
That could be too.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
You know, like, wait a minute, you're putting it where?
Yeah.
That okay. And then, now the
All right.
gesture makes no sense.
Yeah,
but that's fine.
yeah,
And
I got you.
Hancock would ride up the road until Ken Burns' great-great-great-grandfather came running up to him saying, "General, we cannot afford to lose you.
That's right.
And there are times a corps commander's life does not count. And
Right.
we can only hope that all of that actually happened. But he did ride his horse up the line, which was what generals did.
Yeah.
There are many instances of that. You know, you
Calms the men.
got to be careful. Yeah, he's good officers out there showing, settle down, fellas. It'll be all right somehow.
Yeah. I wonder if that really does calm the men or if they think he's an idiot. Because I'm thinking when Eric used to be on the show and we would, talk about something like that, Eric was, infantryman. And he's not too fond of officers.
No.
And so he would have probably, I'm imagining, he would have thought that Hancock was an idiot for exposing himself like that. And it doesn't help him either way. It doesn't help Eric either way.
The great story, shifting to July 2nd, sorry,
Okay.
is Van Horn Ellis,
Yeah.
Yes.
We talked
James
about him.
Cromwell,
Yep.
and they're going to lead their countercharge down this impossible slope of ground, the triangular field down in the apron of the Devil's Den, as the 124th is going to charge down against the Texans. I don't know how you could ride down that hill on a horse.
I don't
Never
either.
mind anybody shooting at you.
Yeah.
Just riding down that on a horse.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the horse doing it. Like,
No.
what are you, nuts? Look at this hill. I can't.
I'm not going down
I'm
there.
not going down this. Maybe they had mules. I don't know. But the famous quote arising from that, which was heard by others, so it's reasonably reliable, is the men must see us
Yes.
on this day.
But I can understand that for a colonel or a lieutenant colonel or a major, but a corps commander, a major general.
The officer's an officer.
Yeah, I guess so.
You
I
know,
guess
he's
so.
the guy in charge. Yeah, that's my regimental guy, and I know him from home. But they know who these other commanders are now too. Their division commanders and their corps commanders. They know who they are.
Yeah.
Hancock's pretty famous
Yeah.
You know.
in the Army.
And so maybe for some it does inspire them or something.
Well,
but-
if you're an infantryman getting pounded and you're hiding behind a stone wall, here comes a guy that, maybe know and respect, and he's on horseback.
Yes.
All of a sudden you think, well, maybe I'm not so bad off after all.
Right.
You know?
This guy's 8 feet in the air, or
Yeah.
however tall you are on a horse.
There's a New Jersey story of 12th New Jersey infantryman named Simon Creamer, who got drafted, waylaid, kidnapped, grabbed. They make it sound voluntary, but sometimes it's not. And he was assigned to help out, fill out the crews on 1st Rhode Island Battery A.
Okay.
So he was a big guy. And you like to have big guys in the artillery because they got to roll the cannon back after it recoils.
Right.
And so there's the men of the 12th New Jersey, hugging the ground, digging their way to China, one handful of dirt at a time. And here that artillery battery rolls into position, and there's their guy. They can see him.
Uh-huh.
And he's standing to his guns as they're firing back, and he's decapitated.
Oof.
And in tribute to him, they bury him with the men of the 12th New Jersey. So he's in the National Cemetery. They get to stand by his grave and tell the story that, while everybody else is on the ground, he's standing to his gun.
Yeah.
And catches one in the chin. And that's it for him, but he, the rest of his body was buried not with the Rhode Island Artillery, but with the men of the 12th New Jersey in the New Jersey section.
Wow. So you talking about the infantry digging holes to China, a lot of the guys fell asleep, or a few of the guys fell asleep?
Yeah. And it might be, I have a quote I can read to you.
Go ahead.
These guys we're sitting at the point of woods in front of the Spangler. We're closer to the Confederate line. They took a lot heavier losses during the cannonade.
Yeah.
Because the Union forces were on the military crest, slightly forward
Explain
of the
military crest.
Well, it's the defilade position. Remember how I screwed that up on the podcast? This is the defilade position. They're using they're forward of the true crest of the ridge.
Right.
So they're not silhouetted on top of the crest, and the shots from the Confederates, they really have to be pinpoint to hit their line. They're going long or short, but many of them long. There's troops on Culp's Hill that I point to Charlie. People in radio land can't see that. There's troops on Culp's Hill who report getting artillery fire from behind them, hitting the trees.
Yep.
That's how far the overshots went. But the Union artillery firing back at the Confederate artillery line, the Confederate troops are behind Seminary Ridge on the Brown Farm area.
Yeah.
What was it called at the time of the battle? Wasn't the Brown Farm then.
Was it Pitzer?
I'm not sure. But in any case, the farm back
Pitzer
there
sounds familiar.
The Union artillery overshots go through the woods of Seminary Ridge right into the ranks of the Confederate troops.
Right.
And the Spangler Farm over here, where Pickett's, I'm pointing to the south of the Point of Woods, that's where Pickett's division, his 3 brigades are in the ground, and the artillery fire. That artillery fire is completely random because you can't see them from Cemetery Ridge.
They're on the reverse slope of the ridge.
They're on the reverse
so
slope of the Spangler Farm. If you go down the Spangler Farm, you can't see past the Emmetsburg Road.
Yeah.
And so those artillery shots are going in there. And here's an account from Erasmus Williams of the 14th Virginia, who is digging a hole.
Smart.
And he's talking about a specific person that he doesn't name. And he says, he laughed at me for digging a hole and said good-naturedly, "Why, Williams, you're acting like a coward." "You can call me what you please," said I, "but when the artillery begins, the hole I am digging will be a good place for me to be in." He took things less cautiously than I did. In a little while, the signal shot fired, and there came a terrific blast all along the lines from the enemy's guns in reply. In a few minutes, I was covered with dirt from the shot and shell striking near me. Presently, indeed almost instantly, the defiant lieutenant was swept away by a shell, and his blood sprayed all over me. So, oops.
Should have dug a hole, Lieutenant.
So, the birth of the Foxhole.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, one of the things that Sarah Broadhead was thinking of these men out here experiencing the danger and the terror of the bombardment. And she says, "We knew that with every explosion and the screams of each shell, human beings were hurried through excruciating pain into another world, and that many more were torn and mangled and lying in torment worse than death, and no one able to extend relief." So even though we've got the civilians in their cellars, terrified for their own lives, they're keeping in mind what the soldiers are going through.
There's Jeremiah Gage is a famous one who was mortally wounded during the bombardment. Want to tell that story, Chaz?
You tell it.
He's laying there, and a shell hits him, and he dies.
I have it right here.
Do I pass the exam?
Do you want
tell
to
the
hear?
story.
Do you want to
Yeah.
hear? Well, he's a very famous teenager from Company A of the 11th Mississippi, the famous University Grays from the Oxford area. Mm-hmm. That is the company that is immortalized in William Faulkner's novels. And he's famous. I remember one of my very first battlefield tours before I was a guide. I took a guy. I hired a guide to take me around, and he read me this letter over, behind us on Seminary Ridge. Jeremiah Gage, for his letter, is famous.
Yep.
But he's wounded in this bombardment.
Yep.
And he is dictating this letter to the surgeon of the 11th Mississippi, John Holt, who's taking care of him. So Holt is the one writing this stuff down. I saw in an instant a condition of terrible shock. He pointed to his left arm and quickly exposed it and found that a cannonball had nearly torn it away between the elbow and the shoulder. I made some encouraging remark when he smiled and said, "Why, doctor, that is nothing. Here is where I'm really hurt." He laid back on his blanket and exposed his lower abdomen, which had been torn from left to right by a piece of shrapnel, carrying away the bladder, his intestines, and a third half of his pelvis.
Oh, that's
grief.
way worse than I ever imagined.
Yeah. So he gave him some opium really fast.
Yeah.
Here you go, son. You
gonna need
all
this.
of this.
Quickly.
And have you no message to leave? And he dictates this letter. "Dear Mother, this is the last you may ever hear from me. I have time to tell you that I died like a man. Bear my loss as best you can. Remember that I am true to my country, and my greatest regret at dying is she is not free, and that you and sisters are robbed of my worth, whatever that may be. I hope this will reach you, and you must not regret that my body cannot be obtained. It is a mere matter of form anyhow. This is for sisters too, as I cannot write more. Send my dying release to Miss Mary. You know who." Then he asks Dr. Holt to give him the piece of paper, and he pushes it against his wound and hands it back to him, and then he writes the postscript, "This letter has been stained with my blood." And
can you imagine being that mother?
And then you're all crying, and you give a big tip.
But can you imagine being his mother and getting that letter, and his blood is on it? But that was the thing: blood, hair.
It's also, I think, a strong document in the discussion of the causes.
Yes.
What are the soldiers fighting? They really have the belief, that my greatest regret is my country is not free. It's really how they looked at it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So the bombardment goes on, and now it's time for the infantry to step off. And they do. Now, Garnett's men and Kemper's men are off here, right, in the fields of the Spangler Farm?
Yes.
Okay. So they've been laying, as we said before, on the reverse slope of the ridges that they're out on. So they're not seen by the Union troops because they're laying flat to the ground. Armistead's brigade is the only one that's in the woods. Is that
only
also
one
correct?
Regiment.
Only one regiment is in the woods.
It's right here where we're sitting.
Where we are right now.
Yeah.
Okay, and the rest of them are out in this field here behind us?
They're
Or
in front of you, behind me. They're south.
they're over there?
Yeah, they're all in that hollow of the Spangler
They're along
Farm.
the tree line here.
Okay.
As Ralph told you about the firing over on Culp's Hill, you don't want to be in the woods when the cannonballs come.
No, you don't.
You want to be in the woods.
So it's okay. So they purposely don't have them in the woods because of that reason. Okay. So Garnett and Kemper's brigades, especially, or maybe Armistead's too, now that I know they're not all in the woods, when the time comes for them to get up, a lot of them can't get up, not because they've been hit by shrapnel, but because of the sun, correct?
Yeah, there are a few that are incapacitated due to heat exhaustion.
But not an overwhelming amount.
We'll never know for sure.
Right. But the first casualties are going to be these guys who can't even get up to go.
Well, once the infantry advances, yes.
Yeah. All right. And so then the infantry does advance, but they've got this 800-yard or so gap to fill.
Correct.
Or to close between Pickett's division and the right of the Pettigrew-Trimble column.
Yeah.
Okay. Why? Why is there that big gap? Why doesn't Lee have them just all go straight in?
Because they can be seen.
Because they could be seen.
Yeah, the Pickett's out here in these fields and Pettigrew's back there. You can't put a line in because if you move Pettigrew forward to be in line with Pickett, he can be seen.
Right. Okay.
Now, you could move Pickett back, but then he's got to get through these woods.
Yeah, to get
going.
Gotcha.
So that's essentially why there's a gap.
Does it also divert the enemy's attention, or maybe diverts?
Well,
not
it's
the
a
word.
two-column attack.
Yeah.
Yes.
As it initiates.
Right.
North Carolinians are a good distance to our north, away from the Virginians.
Yeah.
And as they're coming into view, the Union line will not know where the attack is coming.
Right.
And I believe that's part of Longstreet, even though he doesn't write that. It's a lot he doesn't write. But that was his plan, is to show Lee left it up to him. I want you to break through to Cemetery Hill. You figure it out.
Right.
And his calculation is two columns advance across the ground, the Union defenses will remain in place. They will not concentrate at a single point because they don't know where that point is.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is a large force. This is a 3-brigade front. Correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie. It's a 3-brigade front on the North Carolina side.
Uh-huh.
That's a wide line.
Yeah.
So they're hitting they're not hitting the angle, they're hitting the entire line out to the Bryan farm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole defense is going to get locked in. And then here, this Virginia division pops his head up out of nowhere, heading toward the Cadore farm. It's going to keep that Union defense spread out.
Got it. Okay. So there's a purpose to it.
Yeah.
It's not just
And then at
practical.
the last moment, when they reached the Emmitsburg Road, literally, now they're no longer in the hollow. They've marched up the Spangler Lane. Well, they're in brigade form, so they're, a quarter-mile wide, but, they're following up the Spangler Lane. They get to the Emmitsburg Road. As soon as they get to the Emmitsburg Road, which is where the Cadore farm is, they're not going to oblique to the left. It's their assignment to close with the North Carolina column. North Carolina column, which is also Alabama and Tennessee and Mississippi on the other side, they're going straight at the Union position.
Uh-huh.
It's the Virginians who have the job of closing with them to the concentration point, which then, of course, 20 years later, one of the Taylors, William Taylor, is it?
I think it is, yes.
Not the famous Taylor, not Bo Brinkman's Taylor.
That would be Walter Taylor.
Walter Taylor, right.
Yeah.
William Taylor tells John Batchelder that the copse of trees was the focal point of the two coming together.
Right.
Yes. That was 20 years later?
Well, it was quite a bit later, wasn't it?
It was close to that.
Okay.
He went out and put the little plaques on the trees and asked the guy not to cut them down.
Yeah.
So it was, and then the fence goes up around those trees in 84, 85, just before the 25-year reunion.
And when did they put the iron bar on it to stabilize it, which only attracted the lightning?
That was
on the trees.
Yeah, that was probably during the War Department.
Yeah.
Period.
Those trees weren't much of trees.
No, they were like saplings.
The
weren't
copse of trees was basically a big shrub pile.
Yeah.
A man on horseback, they said, could see over them.
Yeah.
At one point.
So that's when I learned that, because the movie shows the way it looks now,
Sure.
or the way it did in 1992. But when I heard, and actually, if you go to the cyclorama, it's depicted pretty well.
Yep.
Yes.
And I find it odd that would be the thing that Lee would point out as the thing for everybody to focus on. Because how do you really, if a man on a horse could see over the whole thing, how impressive is it from 3/4 of a mile away?
Well, it doesn't become impressive until Taylor tells Batchelder.
Aha.
Okay, the fence that emanates from the Virginia Monument here and goes across the field is the fence of direction. Fry's brigade's lined up on that fence. Pickett's to close in on them.
Yeah.
Follow that fence, and where does it take you? It takes you to the angle.
Straight to it.
Almost straight to the angle.
Yeah.
Once again, back in last century, when I was listening to this talk, when Pickett's men get, at least Kemper, gets to the Emmitsburg Road, the confusion and the smoke is such that he's not sure where to go. Armistead comes up, and they see this little bunch of trees in the smoke, and so let's go for that because it's close to where we're supposed to be. And so, in a sense, if it is the objective, it becomes the objective, not so much the objective, but a waypoint during the advance.
A focal point, yeah, okay.
And then, of course, it takes on a life of its own after the war is over.
I see, okay. So that's interesting. Okay, so they immediately begin to take casualties from Union artillery.
True.
Is the Confederate artillery firing over their heads at all?
No.
So it's just Union artillery firing into them.
Alexander will specifically say how his guns go silent as the troops march through his guns.
Right.
And to avoid some embarrassment with Longstreet, Alexander actually rides out with Garnett and advances with him on horseback because the threat to his life of being on horseback approaching the Emmitsburg Road and this Union line is a lower priority than to get away from James Longstreet. Because there's a whole thing. I don't know if you want to get into this. I use it in leadership training programs as a whole fascinating unilateral, unfortunately, conversation that occurs through messages between Longstreet and Alexander. It's kind of a single source set of documents because it's Alexander who remembers these messages.
Right.
They were not part of the official record. They were not staff messages per se. So we kind of have to take Alexander at his word. But Longstreet is sending messages to Alexander like, you know, if your artillery fire is not received the desired effect, I want you to call off the attack. And Alexander's like, what? He shows it. I think he shows it to James Deering, and Ambrose Wright is out there.
He showed it to Wright. For sure.
We know he has Wright's comment.
Yes.
And he goes, what does this mean? He says, well, it means that he doesn't want to do it. He wants you to be the one to blow the whistle saying, call it off.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility, not his.
So Alexander writes him a message back and says, I will let you know when the fire is at its best. But, if there's any doubt that this is not going to work, let's think this through because I don't have all that much ammunition.
Right.
It's not for word. I could read it word for word.
Right.
But we'll be here all week.
You got the idea.
And Longstreet sends another message when you see. Oh, right. The second message when you see the guns gone.
Yeah.
When you've cleared out the guns on Cemetery Ridge, give the word for Pickett to advance. And here's 28-year-old Colonel says, give the word to who? To do what? No.
Right.
Can't see a thing.
And he sends a message
colonel,
back.
Right?
He says, I can't see a thing up there, and if the guns are gone, they're going to have more guns, and I don't know. And so finally Longstreet rides out there and tells him, I don't want to make this attack.
Yeah.
I don't think this is going to work. And Alexander's like, thank you for sharing. Oh, look, there goes Garnett. Hey, Dick, hold up.
Here goes Pickett. Pettigrew.
There goes the only general on horseback because he can't walk. I think I'll ride next to him because it's less embarrassing than what's happening here.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that is.
We don't even actually know how far Alexander got. He doesn't explain that he did more than ride out with Garnett because, of course, Garnett will be probably vaporized by canister fire because he's the only one on horseback.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing, I hope it's correct, Charlie can jump in, that there's a statistic that there are 99 Confederate generals killed in the war.
Okay.
And Garnett's the only one they never found.
They never found him. That's correct.
Yeah.
Never found him.
That could be that just somebody took off his uniform.
Yeah.
They found a sword in a pawn shop in Baltimore.
Right. They found a sword. That somebody could have just taken his uniform as a prize.
Right.
Or he could have been one of those pink vapor clouds that happened to occur in front of canister fire.
Or if they strip him and he lost his head, let's say. Not like a Yankees.
Yeah, but you still have shoulder. You still have all the cauliflower on his sleeves.
Somebody said they cut his epaulets off.
Yeah, there you go.
The uniform. So
in all likelihood, he's at Hollywood Cemetery in the mass graves with all the other Confederates that were buried.
The old guides had him buried in the National Cemetery as the only Confederate over there.
Is that true?
Yeah, the old guides.
Yeah.
With the old guides meaning what? The original class?
The guides that were before 1951.
William Allison has that in his stories the guides tell.
That's right. Stories
Garnett's
in
the unknown section.
He's over there. He's the only Yankee buried over there.
It's possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true. We don't know.
I put him anywhere I want.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows where he is.
I think he's still on the upslope of Cemetery.
Yeah.
I do that with Leslie Culp, too. Where's Leslie Culp?
Right.
Where do you want him to be buried?
I heard Garnett's buried in the Normandy Cemetery over in France.
Well big. I mean,
nobody knows.
Get around after he's dead. But yeah, that's true. He's the only one in either army.
Yeah.
Who's not accounted for after the war.
Oh, I didn't know either army.
Yeah, either army.
Now, how about when they get to the road, Emmitsburg Road?
Yes.
How are they as far as keeping formation together? How are they as far as the casualties that they've taken? Are they still roughly 12,000, 15,000 strong? Or
no, a guy in Pickett's division, one of the officers, I forget his name, he was a regimental commander. He said, we marched as if on parade.
Yeah.
Until we got to the road. And once we crossed the road, I lost a friend for every step I took.
Jeez.
So it's once I cross the road is when you run into the canister. And, you look at that. What is it, 450 yards from the angle to the Emmitsburg Road.
You're within musket and canister
You're not pulling
range.
the trigger on a musket until they cross the road.
Right.
And that's where the slaughter ensues.
Yeah. Because those fences are going to hold them up, right?
Well, depends on which fence you want. You got to remember, they went across this field on July 2nd. Confederates went across the field. They got close to the angle, if not.
But did they go this route, or did they come in more at an angle?
Well, it really doesn't matter which route they went. They went to the Emmitsburg Road. They're going to take the fences down.
Yeah. No, I understand that. But
another thing to keep in mind, take a look at the Massachusetts monument.
Which
Pickett's,
one?
Or Sickles' men.
Uh-huh.
The first Massachusetts. What are they doing to the fences?
Taking them down.
They're knocking them down.
Yeah. Okay.
So this stuff about, they get hung up on the fences is a little bit more Hollywood than history. Though the fences, I think they get hung up on. Now, I will agree that the fences in front of Pettigrew are pretty much intact.
Right.
So they're going to get hung up there for sure.
Okay.
But I think the fences that Pickett's men get hung up are after they cross the Emmitsburg Road.
Okay.
Which are closer to the Union line.
To the Union line.
But they will get hung up on.
Yeah.
It just depends on where you want to put them.
And Pettigrew's men are closer to the Union line when they're in the road.
Yes,
of the
they
way
are.
It
Much
angles.
closer, yes.
Yeah. So they're really within rifle range there.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. All right. So when they get over the road, what would you guess out of Pickett's division alone? What did he start with, 6,000?
Well, 5,400.
5,400?
Yeah, a little more maybe.
All right. So he starts with over 5,000 men. How many of his men do you think actually get to the wall? Forget about over the wall. To the wall. Or how about just in that yard in front of the wall there, the yard, the field in front of the wall.
Put it in terms of, excuse me, a few hundred.
Few hundred of them. So that's not a lot.
No.
That's not. Now, people would hear that and go, my God, all those men, out of 5,400 men, only a few hundred even get over across the road up to the wall. And it's all those dead and wounded strewn across the field. But that can't be right.
No, because a big number are coming back to where we are.
That's right.
And some are staying in the road.
Yeah.
Because it's sunken.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have cover there.
Yes. So most of the guys that move forward are either the bravest or the craziest, right? The other ones are either wounded, dead, have come back, or have just hunkered down wherever they are because that's safer than going forward.
Right.
Yeah. Not that they're cowardly. It's just that it was such a terrible thing for them to be pushed into.
The cowards are gone by the time you get here in the Confederate Army.
There you go.
They're not going to run here. I mean, some will eventually, but
yeah. I mean, there's only so much anybody can
North
take.
Carolina from here.
One of the reasons, one of the startling things that is observed by Union defenders is how the Confederate columns, the advancing lines, are stopping to dress their gaps.
Right.
They're stopping and closing their gaps, dressing the line. File closes from the back or just making half the regiment shift to the left. Under all of this artillery fire, under all this, they're actually stopping their forward motion to reposition the cohesion of the battle line.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because if you don't hold the cohesion of that battle line, everything becomes a mass and everything falls apart.
Right.
And that is essentially what occurred, I think, once they are over the Emmitsburg Road.
Yeah.
One of the combat veterans can tell you about this. One of the horrors of combat is if you're in a low ground and enemy position is above you on a line and they're firing down on you. Many times the best option is to charge them.
Right.
Okay.
You stay where you are, you're going to get cut to bits.
Sure.
You try to withdraw, too late for that, you're too close in. Closing with the enemy is the best way to save your own life.
Okay.
Which sounds...
Makes sense, though.
That's nuts. But when you're standing there, you can actually see it.
Yes.
When you stand down there in a hollow, you're like, yeah, Armistead's right. The only way I'm going to get out of here with anybody alive is by getting under them.
Yep.
Get under these guns.
Yeah.
And get right up on that stone wall where they go to ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's
where,
your closest cover is a stone wall.
Yeah.
It's your closest cover.
And the enemy's using it too.
I think it is Raleigh Martin, the captain of their guide regiment, 53rd Virginia, who, and Armistead said, they're friends, and Armistead says to him, well, we can't stay here. and Martin says to him, well, then, General, we should go forward. And that's where he jumps up on the stone wall and puts his hat on his sword.
Right.
Because he doesn't have a flag handy. Generals don't get the flag. And he's waving his hat on his sword. We know that happened because Alfred Ward drew it.
Uh-huh.
The newspaper correspondent saw it and drew the picture of Armistead charging the cannon.
So where was Alfred
Richard
Ward?
Jordan put his hat on the sword back here.
Right.
I want to know what that hat looked like by the time they got up there.
Had a lot of holes in it. Yeah,
up and down. He's got to keep putting it back up again. By the time he gets up there, it's going to be...
But in the movie, it's down to the hilt.
Yeah, when he starts off, he put his flag up there. The
Nobody
other
could see
officers
it
looking
there.
at him.
Yeah, right.
How many of those hats you got? But that occurs up at the stone wall when they jump over the wall, again to close with the enemy and get literally at the guns, which were at the wall.
Right.
Yeah.
So Armistead and maybe 200 of his men or 200 men, we don't know if they're all his, 200, a handful of Confederates actually breach the wall and get over it.
Some were with Pettigrew.
So then this is the big...
Some of Fry's men.
Yeah,
right, some of Fry's men.
With them.
All, though, were killed or captured or wounded.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I say it's closer to 300, although there's no way that anybody can actually know this. But some of the men of the 71st Pennsylvania who were caught at in fact, there's a rock named after the one guy, isn't there? Some sergeant, I can't remember. I heard it from Wayne Motts, so
Must be
it's
true.
Yeah, and they were captured by Alabama men. So it wasn't the Virginians; it was the Fry's Brigade coming in.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
And so they make that breakthrough, but there's a thick line of Union forces behind the breakthrough.
Yeah.
So once they get through Alonzo Cushing's section that was up by the wall, and look down at Cushing's dead body, saying, "Somebody give that kid a medal."
Yeah. In 150 years.
And then they charged up to as far as the Armistead marker. They knew that's as far as they could go. They saw the marker and they rushed up to it. I'll tell people that these 300, they're all dead or captured, and the ones who are captured are lying on the ground, wounded, asking for some water.
Yep.
Because now they know where the attack is, and those regiments, like the 3 Massachusetts regiments that are sort of to the south side of the copse of trees, they gear up and rush to the north side to contain the breach, the breakthrough. That's where Sumner Payne is killed.
Is it the 19th, 20th, and what's the third one?
The 15th, 19th, and 20th.
15th, okay.
Their monuments used to sit by the copse of trees.
They put them all right in the copse of trees.
Copse of trees.
And then
who
now
moved
they just
them?
have
Somebody
those.
made. Was it?
It was Batchelder. They wanted them to put it on their lines, but Massachusetts said, "All right, we'll do it, but we want to put tablets there to indicate."
Those three metal signs are there where the monuments originally were.
You can see where the monuments were. The impressions are still in the ground.
And you can also see what would have happened if Massachusetts gets to put its monuments almost literally in the copse of trees.
Yeah, everybody's going to put them in.
Where's the 42nd New York? Where's the 12th New Jersey? Where's the 72nd Penn? It would like be a
just be a cluster. It'd be a copse of monuments.
It'd be a smaller battlefield.
Yeah.
All we'd have to do is preserve the copse of trees.
Yeah, surrounded by stone monuments. So that's it, we're good.
We call it Stonehenge.
So they made them move them out, but they put signs up there to tell you that they used to be here, but we made them move.
Right. Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So, Roseanne, at the bombardment's over, did the civilians, any of them come out of their houses and observe maybe Pickett's charge or anything?
Well, at least two of them say that they saw it.
Okay.
But I don't know how much they saw. Henry Jacobs and his father, Professor Michael Jacobs, had a telescope from the college, so they're up on their roof looking at it. But Albertus McCreary, who's one block further south, says he couldn't see anything because of all the smoke from the bombardment.
But he doesn't have a telescope.
No, he doesn't. But he did. Well, I don't know what he had. But maybe he was eating a lot of those vegetables and had good eyesight. I don't know. But he did say he did see the beginning of Pickett's charge, at least. So I don't know how he had all the smoke from the bombardment. Maybe, it cleared and he saw something. He said he saw a cannon, he saw a flag, he saw a staff go down. But after that, they didn't really see anything and just stayed in the cellar. And then when everything was over, it was quiet.
Yes.
An ominous quiet.
Yeah, too quiet.
And the Confederates are returning to town, and around Catherine Foster's house, they'd been very chatty with her all the way up until they go into battle, I suppose. And at that point, she says they clammed up, wouldn't give any information whatsoever. As the bombardment is going on at, I think, at Mary McAllister's house, the wounded Union that are there are telling her, we know our guns, we know our men, and we're winning, and you don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
But most of the citizens said that when the charge was over, that the Confederates returned and their whole demeanor had changed. Up until that point, they were bragging and they were very confident, and now they're very sullen and withdrawn. And some of them believe that they need to prepare for an attack in town. So some of the barricades are being reinforced. But, of course, nothing comes of that. But then what ends up happening is some of the Confederates are going around to the houses. One of them comes to Catherine Garlack's house, and she's the woman I had mentioned previously who really very bravely defended her home. No, to the Confederate. No, you can't come in here. You can't use my house for a sharpshooting position. No, go somewhere else. They come to her house, and they're looking for wood. They knew that her husband was a cabinet maker, and they're looking for wood to make a coffin for Barksdale, who obviously was mortally killed, wounded, whatever. I don't know if he had died by that point or not, but they wanted a coffin, wood to build a coffin for him.
Yeah.
And she says, well, you can take the wood, but you're not building it here because for the same reason she wouldn't allow the sharpshooter to stay. We're women and children here. We're defenseless, and you're going to draw fire upon us.
Yeah.
So she says, well, you can take the wood, but go down to my neighbor's house.
Oh, nice.
They could take the incoming for me. But it was only down to Daniel Culp's house by the courthouse, so... They did. They went down there with the wood. They began to build the coffin. But Anna Garlack, Catherine's daughter, says, well, she doesn't think that they did finish building that because at that point then the Confederates are being withdrawn.
Yeah. And
that she believes that the coffin was then used for Jenny Wade. And, of course, we haven't mentioned Jenny Wade as being the only civilian who was killed during the 3-day battle, and although many were injured and maybe some died afterwards from their injuries or as a result of the battle, her being, of course, right there on so close in no man's land.
Yeah.
And I think many people are probably familiar with the story of Jenny, so I don't think we need to talk about it a whole lot.
But she was the civilian who was killed baking bread, just baking bread.
Yeah, just baking bread. She had yeast, I guess.
Bread. She had yeast, yeah.
Sarah Broadhead did
Unlike
not.
Sarah.
Uh-huh.
And a bullet came through the door and killed her. 2 doors, yeah, you're right. 2 doors and killed her.
But the interesting thing, and I don't think many people realize, is how, at that point, Georgia screams, her sister, when she hears the news that Jenny has been shot in the back. She screams, and the Union soldiers come rushing into the house. What's wrong? What can we do? And of course, there's Jenny with the dough still in her fingers. And how are they going to get her? They're not. They said to the family, "You can't stay here. Obviously, now this is too dangerous."
So now they realize.
Now you have to leave.
Yeah.
So how are they going to get her out? Well, the day before, an artillery shell goes through. Because it's a duplex house.
Right.
And there's McLean family was on the other side, and a shell goes through the roof. On George's side of the house and plows through the brick wall that's separating the 2 homes, and then comes to rest in an eave underneath the house, the McLean side. So they end up evacuating through that hole, up the stairs and through the hole between the 2 buildings, and then down and outside, because they couldn't go outside. I don't know if there was a cellar on her side or not, but they'd have to go outside to get into it.
Yes.
So so Georgia
and it would be dangerous.
And Georgia with the baby, and there's also a disabled young boy and her brother and her mother, and
it's a
they're
mess.
all down there in the cellar until they're able to bury her.
When did you say
day.
The shell went through the house?
July 2nd.
So so that would have been the time to say, "Hey, this is our way out." Mm-hmm. But they go, let's wait until somebody gets shot.
Honestly,
we've done an episode about Jenny Wade, and you can go and find it, folks. I'm apparently the lone voice in the wilderness on this whole thing. Why the hell did they wait so long to protect these civilians? I don't understand it.
They're afraid to move Georgia.
That's always the answer, and
That's
I call
the answer
BS.
I got. Yeah,
it's always get a stretcher, move her. Like you got to look.
But she was nearly shot. Also, she's lying in bed, and the bullets are coming through.
Right?
Yeah.
It hits the headboard of the bed. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So I I get it. She had a baby. She was bleeding or something like that,
but she
right?
had the baby on June 26th. So, it's not
Should
like
be clotting
it
by
was
now.
just not like, just 5 hours ago I gave birth and I can't move. I would think that would be enough motivation for me, having a newborn or not.
This is what I'm saying.
To get moving.
And I'm thinking, the soldiers around there. I don't know. Whatever. There's a whole episode you can go listen to.
I don't know. Maybe they wanted the bread. Maybe they knew she's baking bread for us. We're going to let her stay there.
Bake on the McLean side of the house.
Yep.
All right. So there's one more action down at the south end of the field with Farnsworth's charge. But that's, I don't know. You want to go real quick, Charlie? Just tell us about that real quick.
Well, Farnsworth's charge was motivated by the fact that the infantry of the Confederate Army had been defeated. It was running back. And the idea was now we're supposed to strike. Meade resisted the temptation that his officers suggested coming straight across the field, which I think would have been a big mistake. So the idea was you hit the flanks, and Kilpatrick orders Farnsworth to advance. There's that little discussion whether it was practical or not. I think Kilpatrick expected infantry support that did not come. And so Farnsworth rides off into history and memory in the charge. He's hit with one account said he was shot 7 times, and yet they say he still committed suicide. I don't know how that happens, but anyway, he's one of the boy generals, the 3 that were elevated just before the battle. Custer being the most famous. Merritt, who was the best of the 3,
right,
captured the Philippines,
in
the Spanish-American War. But be that as it may, that was kind of the idea behind Farnsworth's charge on July the 3rd.
All right. And with that, for our purposes here on this episode, the Battle of Gettysburg comes to a close. And that is it for us. So thank you, Charlie, Roseanne, Ralph, for coming on the show today and talking to us about this. If you are listening and you want to listen to the show from where we're sitting so that when you hear Charlie or Ralph say to our left or to our right or the south or the north, All you got to do is go to the Virginia Memorial, take the path that goes out into the field, and the very last tree along the fence line to your right is where Charlie is literally sitting in front of the tree right now. If you stand here, you're not going to see much. You might have to actually go out to the battery at the end of the trail. So go to the end of the trail and face the Union line, and then from there you should be able to get your bearings when they're talking about north-south. Your left is the north, your right is the south, straight ahead is the east for all intents and purposes here. That's about it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. And we hope if you're new to all this that you'll stick around and check out other episodes of Addressing Gettysburg. We like to have fun, but we also take our history very seriously. And that's about it. Talk to you next time. Goodbye.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, forsooth 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man forget shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale.